Welcome to a new series on the Nutrient Nirvana channel, Shards of Illumination. Once a month, regular guest and friend to the channel, Ralph Ellis, will be joined by a special guest to discuss and debate various topics of interest. Ralph Ellis is the author of over 10 books on ancient and biblical history. In his 4-part trilogy on the historical Jesus, Ralph has produced an extraordinary theological discovery, the true identity and genealogy of the biblical Jesus. In addition, Ralph has a peer-reviewed scientific paper on the causes of ice ages. In this first episode, our special guest is Nigel Howitt. Nigel presents one of my favourite channels on YouTube, Lawful Rebel, that focuses on a variety of interesting topics including health, philosophy, critical thinking, education, economics, climate, politics and more. I highly recommend the Lawful Rebel channel to all truth seekers. Thanks for watching, and as always, do please like, share and subscribe to my channel. Hello and welcome to a new show, Shards of Illumination. This is episode 1. I'm your host, Paul. I'm with my regular guest, Ralph Ellis, and today we've got a very special guest with us, Nigel Howitt, aka Lawful Rebel on YouTube. Hi Nigel, how are you?
Very good indeed. Thanks, Paul. Thank you for inviting me here. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure, mate. So we're going to kick today off with this question, which is: was Copernicus a fraud? Now, I'll go with you, Nigel. You can start us off with this. So, was Copernicus a fraud?
Well, Copernicus, obviously the chap that gave his name to the Copernican model of our solar system. Was he a fraud? Or I would probably, I don't actually have enough information to know whether he was a fraud. I'm not sure he was correct. There were others that came after him. Tycho Brahe, the Danish astronomer, sort of picked up after Copernicus died, which I think was in something like the 1540s. And I think his model, although it was geocentric and had the Earth actually stationary, there were a number of problems with that model. Yes, I personally, I would probably say that he's wrong in the light of new information that's come to light, which I can speak more about in a moment, rather than a fraud. I think when you get to Kepler, Johannes Kepler was an assistant of Tycho Brahe, or Tycho Brahe, I'm not sure quite how to pronounce his name. And there have been books written about their relationship, and there's possible shenanigans and fraud going on there. But I'd have to concede that I don't have enough information on Nicholas Copernicus to know an exact answer to that question.
Okay, I think it's pronounced Tycho Brahe, I think.
Brahe, yes.
I think it's pronounced. So, Ralph, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, two schools of thought on this, either a fraud or he invented the system separately. But because this information was known about in the ancient past, I like to... I saw that other people thought he was a fraud. It was on Blackadder, if you remember the Blackadder series. On the introduction to Blackadder, they always said that that he was the greatest fraud in history. That was one of the strap lines on their introduction. So that was interesting. Yeah, he might have been a fraud because the heliocentric model of the solar system was well known back in ancient history. So we have evidence from the Hamat-Tavera zodiac, in fact, all of the zodiacs in Judea. So these are zodiacs in Judea on the Sea of Galilee, and we've got about 6 of them, I think 7 maybe. And most of them have Helios in the center of the zodiac, holding a spherical Earth in his hand, in his gravitational grasp, as it were, perfectly illustrating the heliocentric model of the solar system. And you can see it's a sphere of the Earth as well, because it has two golden lines on it. And those curved lines on the Earth figure, they are either sort of latitudes and longitudes, or they are the cross of the ecliptic, where if you put two lines across the Earth matching up where the ecliptic extent is, they cross in the center of the Earth. So it could well be the cross of the ecliptic. And they are curved. They're going around a sphere. It's obviously, and the Earth is colored blue-green. So they knew it was a blue-green spherical Earth. And the Hamat-Tavera zodiac is 1st century. So this is going back quite a long way. And of course, even Eratosthenes knew that the Earth was spherical. He measured the size of the Earth, and that was, 3rd century BC, I think that was. So the heliocentric model has been known for a long, long time. Obviously, it was squashed by the Catholic Church when the Catholic Church took over from Rome and Greece. And the information could have been lost, I suppose. So you could say that that Copernicus didn't have that information and he rediscovered it himself. That's possible. But several people think that he was a fraud and it was known about, and he was just the first person brave enough to broadcast that information. So we don't entirely know. But yeah, it's an interesting topic that this knowledge, technical knowledge and scientific knowledge, was known about, was lost, and then had to be rediscovered during the Renaissance. Yeah, it's a shame that the Catholic Church ever took over from Rome, basically. I had this little postulation in one of my books that what if Rome never fell? And I was guesstimating that if Rome had continued on its trajectory, we would have had, the space race in the 7th or 8th century, and yeah, we would have had moon bases, by the turn of the first millennium. We would have been living on the moon, all that sort of stuff. It's just the vagaries of chance, isn't it? Rome dissolved and was destroyed, and so we didn't get that technical advance, which is a shame.
It's interesting, your answer there, Ralph, sheds some further light on the question, Paul. I was unaware, was he claiming to have come up with this heliocentric model? Is that the respect with which you're accusing him of being fraudulent? Yes.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I still maintain that there's evidence now that suggests, quite controversially, of course, that the heliocentric model is not the accurate model of our solar system. And interestingly enough, most people don't realize that there are so many anomalies with the heliocentric model that astronomers have been at great pains to explain away over the centuries. The most obvious one being the retrograde motion of planets, most notably Mars and of course others. And then there's the issue of stellar parallax and the unexplained analemma. There's all sorts of points of concern where you could legitimately say, well, this model doesn't actually fit with all of the observed evidence, with all the things that we can see. And for me, logically speaking, that calls for the model to be seriously questioned and had a close look at, or indeed look at.
But those concerns have been answered a long time ago. I mean, this is why Tycho made his revised solar system, because of those problems with the Copernican system. But they've been explained centuries ago. I mean, the retrograde motion of the planets is obvious from a moving Earth. That's exactly what you'll see. You'll see some of these planets go retrograde. Yeah. And the parallax issue was because he didn't realize that the size of the stars was increased through atmospheric refraction. So the apparent size of the stars we have in the sky makes it look as though the stars are much closer, 1,000 times closer, at least maybe 10,000 times closer than they actually are, because refraction makes the stars look bigger. when in fact they are little pinpricks of light that you could not discern were it not for the atmosphere. And so he said, look, if we've got these stars very close to us, we should see parallax, changes in their position due to the orbit of the Earth, and we don't. Therefore, we must have a stationary Earth. But of course, the reason why we can't see any parallax changes for these stars is because they are light years away, and he didn't realize that because he didn't understand atmospheric refraction. So all of that has been explained centuries ago.
Well, I would take issue with that, Ralph. I don't think a lot of those things have been satisfactorily explained. I mean, if anyone's interested, there's a book out called The Tychos by an interesting researcher called Simon Shack, a chap who lives in Rome, and he has been studying. He's written this book on a revised model of Tycho Brahe's model, but he brings in something that he calls the PVP orbit, which is to say that the Earth is not stationary. It's not a geostationary model. He actually argues that our solar system is a binary system with the Sun and Mars as a binary pair, which is interesting because approximately 85% of known stars, observable stars, have thus far been identified as part.
I think he's dropped out. Just to answer the point. Oh, is he back again?
Yeah. Oh.
We lost you for a little bit there. Just to counter on that, of course, we have probes that have been to Mercury and Mars and out to Jupiter and Saturn. Now, those trajectories of those particular satellites were developed on the standard heliocentric model, and they worked. So we have direct proof that the calculations they made to get these satellites out to the outer solar system actually worked. And if the solar system had been based on the Tycho model, they would not have worked. You could not have those satellites going to the outer planets.
Well,
and they
maybe unfortunately I dropped out there. I don't know where you lost me, but I was going to say there's a book by a chap called Simon Shack called The Tychos, and his model is based on Tycho Brahe's model, but he's updated it so that it's not geostationary. It's a binary.
But you still don't have a heliocentric model, and the orbit of these satellites was based on the heliocentric system.
Maybe I could just finish this point, Ralph, with respect. So his model has the Sun and Mars rotating around their mutual axis.
Yes, you said this.
Intersecting orbits, I think, is the technical term. This isn't my theory, I hasten to add, so forgive me if I'm not 100% eloquent on describing it. But it's essentially a binary system with the Sun rotating around the Earth and all of the other celestial bodies in the solar system rotating around the Sun. And at the same time, while the Earth rotates on its axis, of course, in 24 hours, it actually moves around its own orbit over a period of 25,344 years, according to Simon Shack's research. If I may just finish his research, it's not mine. I'm just putting this model out there. So this model has been picked up by an IT specialist called Patrick Holmquist, who has developed a computer model. And interestingly enough, the model appears to accommodate precisely all of the known anomalies, which I've heard the point that they've allegedly been solved, but I must confess I don't agree with that position. I've seen an awful lot of evidence that that's not quite the case. So there is this other model, is the point, and I'd recommend people go and have a look at it, because the interesting thing about it,
model. It's an absolute nonsense.
The interesting thing about it, though,
do you understand that gravity is based upon mass?
Well, may I just say that the interesting thing about this model is that it accommodates all of the visual evidence we see. Well, I would recommend anyone who's interested.
Do you understand that gravity is based upon mass?
I don't understand gravity. I observe it and I use
but
it,
you
but I
understand
don't
the
know
solar
how it works.
system.
No, I'm not saying
the sun.
no,
The
hang
sun
on,
has.
Ralph. Hang on. I'm not saying I understand the solar system. I'm saying that there's another model that people
which is
might want to have a look
incorrect.
at. Okay, it looks.
The
All I
sun.
would say about it is that it accommodates all of the
No, it
observable
doesn't.
evidence.
The sun
I'd
holds
invite you to have a look.
99.9% of all the mass in the solar system. Therefore, the planets must rotate around the sun, not vice versa. It's just simply impossible. Absolutely impossible. And I'm surprised that anyone in the 21st century would be putting forward such a suggestion.
Well, Simon Shack is a brilliant example of one of these home researchers who's unencumbered by all the work of NASA, and NASA have told so many lies that they deserve to be doubted. But again, I stress that this model and the 3D model, the Tychosium, which can be found, and I'll furnish you with a link to it if you like, Paul.
Yes.
It fits all of the observed data, including things like Halley's Comet, which has never been adequately explained. Including
of course it's
all
been
of
explained. We know exactly where Halley's Comet came from. The orbit of Halley's Comet has been predicted for centuries. We know exactly where it came from. Look, all of these stupid conspiracy theories, I don't know. I don't like to believe in conspiracies, but there could be a conspiracy within a conspiracy on this, in that various people within governments want to destroy conspiracy theories. And the easiest way to do that is to make conspiracies that are so nonsensical that you can brand people as being illogical if they go along with a conspiracy. And so they can call you a flat earther because they invented the flat earth theory. And it's a way of destroying people. So if you have someone like me who says something different about climate, they can say, he's a flat earther. No, I know what I'm talking about. And I have a reasoned argument, and I'm not falling for the simplest of conspiracy theories. But it's a way of denigrating people, and it suits people very, very nicely, especially within the media. First thing they can do, if you have a contrarian idea, they can come down upon you and say, he's a flat earther. He's a Tycho man.
Well, flat Earth is just absolutely nonsense, isn't it? But I mean, there are conspiracies going on. We have to.
Of course they are, but we want to highlight the serious ones, not the.
Well, I think here's what we have to do, Ralph. We have to keep our rational heads on, and we have to look at the evidence. That's all. You've got to look at evidence and rational arguments. And when you bear in mind also full context, when you know, for example, the conspiracy around money creation and central banking that's been going since 1694 in the UK and since 1913 over in the States, where they finally got their coup de grace of central banks. When you know about this, when you know about the published agendas of all the great think tanks wanting to move towards global governance, to pretend that there aren't conspiracies is nonsense.
Yes.
I mean, to Bruto.
But that's why you have to choose your conspiracies wisely.
Well, you have to investigate all of them and research them carefully and follow the evidence and the facts. And clearly, flat Earth is just a load of nonsense. And if you have a brain, you can work that out. And with all of the other so-called conspiracy theories, you have to go where the evidence leads, and to be too hung up on this phrase conspiracy theory, I mean, you should just ditch that phrase. Just look for what's true and what's real.
Yeah, but that's the way they destroy people, is by throwing these terminologies around. That's why you've got to be
What do you mean
careful.
by destroy people? What do you mean by destroy people?
Oh, the media. I mean, they throw people out of jobs. I mean, you look at the likes of David Bellamy and so on, when he criticized wind farms and global warming.
You can ruin a reputation, but you can't.
He was out of they ruined his reputation and they threw him out of his job.
And he was noble enough to stand up for the truth, I think, wasn't he? So good for him.
Yeah. But he's not the only one. I mean, there's a whole raft of these scientists that have been thrown out of their jobs. Peter Ridd over in Australia, Tim Ball in America.
But with respect, Ralph, that it's irrelevant. Yes, they'll destroy people. There are nasty people out there, and truth seekers will be ridiculed. That's just part of the course. But nobody should be put off trying to find the truth because they're going to be destroyed by somebody. I mean, that's just not the way to go about it at all, is it?
Well, that's easy to say, but if you've got a family and a house and a home and you want to look after them, there's a lot of people will knuckle under and just kowtow to whatever they say because they don't want to lose their job. Remember, if you're pushed out of a job in something like science or climate or whatever, there are very, very limited opportunities for you to go elsewhere. It's not as if you're, a house builder or somewhere and you can move to another town and you can work there. If you lose your position within science, you might lose your position forever. So it's a real problem.
If anybody is trying to hang on to their job, then they're really not in the right circumstances to be pursuing truth. I mean, that's a
but that's 99% of the population, isn't it? Hanging on to their jobs.
Yeah, and that's a tragic place to be. But ultimately, I don't know about you, Ralph, but I'm interested in the truth, and I'm going to go wherever the truth leads, where the evidence leads me. And I'm fortunate enough to be one of those people that's not, I don't need to kowtow to the mainstream in order to keep my income stream going. But I would suggest that any researcher who is in that situation needs to first extricate themselves from that situation, however challenging that may be, if you're trying to pursue the truth, because you will be, as you say, destroyed.
You will, and 99% of people won't go down that road because it's a very dangerous road to go down upon. And you can lose your reputation as well. Some people consider that to be very important, and being rebuked and lose your reputation is almost as bad as losing your house. So there's an awful lot of people will not do. That's how governments control the people. They make an example of one or two people who are very prominent, like David Bellamy or Peter Ridd, and they make an example of them. They put them in jail or they dismiss them from their jobs, and then everybody else keeps their head down.
Except me. I'm not keeping my head down.
Yeah, but we're the 1%. There's not
Absolutely.
many people will risk that.
Don't kowtow to I need my reputation. The truth is more valuable than any reputation. This is the thing we've got to extricate ourselves from. Our whole culture's steeped in this. Oh, I've got to protect everything. I can't speak out. This is why we're in this mess. This is why we're where we're at, because everybody follows the mainstream.
Yeah, well, you look at the problems they've got in Hollywood, where everybody has to kowtow to the woke, because I think this is, segueing into another topic. This is something we were going to discuss, but they all kowtow to the woke agenda because they will lose their jobs. They won't work again. Yeah. And in Hollywood, where'd you go if you lost your job? There is only one Hollywood. Well, there are a few little new Hollywoods that have been set up in Florida and Texas and so on, but you won't have any work. You will lose your entire career.
In this context where we're at, in this age, in this situation, if you want to be a filmmaker, why would you go to Hollywood and prostitute yourself to the establishment? I mean, that's what you'd be doing. You'd have to toe the line if you wanted to work in Hollywood. So if I were a filmmaker and wanted to make interesting films, it would be very difficult, but I'd have to find another way of doing it. You'd have to start small. And it depends whether you want to just stay doing what everyone else does and join the club, or do you want to be an individual? Do you want to do what's right? Do you want to know the truth? Do you want to live on your own terms? These are the things that people should be addressing these days, because that's what we need more of. We don't need followers. We need people that are prepared to go out and make their own films, not Hollywood films, not ones that are scripted and have all the the assumptions and the premises nicely sewn into the story, so people are sort of programmed, their minds are programmed via the back door. I think it's just time for a new approach, isn't it?
No, I think so too. I think Hollywood's had its day, if you ask me, and there are so many amazing documentary makers and filmmakers now online on the internet. You can often tune into YouTube and find something that's far better than anything you would find these days from Hollywood, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Did you hear what happened to Batwoman? Just recently, just last week, they made Batwoman, the new woke film from Disney, I think it was. I think it was a Disney production. And they made the film, $90 million, and they've scrapped it. They've thrown it in a bin because they put it out. Obviously, they put it out to audiences and say, you know, before they actually put it on the show, what do you think about this? And they panned it. Nobody at all in the audience liked it. And they've scrapped it. $90 million worth of film, and they've thrown it in the bin because nobody liked their woke Batwoman. So yeah, they are making mistakes. They're making real mistakes. They have this ideology that is a very small ideology from about 1% of the population, but because they all live in Hollywood, they think this is, you know, a mass movement across the country, and of course it's not. And then they put out these films that they've made to the general population, and they don't like them. They don't go. And suddenly Hollywood is losing money because they don't understand the wider population. They don't understand them at all. So I thought that was fantastic that they lost $90 million. But they always have this wonderful saying, you know, go woke, go broke. And that's exactly what happened.
I just get a sense that the whole wokeism thing is burning itself out very slowly, but it is burning itself out, which is a good thing. And I'm glad that didn't come out, that film, because the sequel probably would have been Bat Tranny or something like that.
It would.
And, that would have been, it might have been funny. I don't know. It might have been a comedy film, possibly. Who knows? Anyway.
What makes you think it's burning itself out, Paul?
I just think that well, maybe not the vast majority, but the majority of people see through it. They just think, what? A man can get pregnant? Seriously? You know, I mean, it's just ridiculous, you know. Life of Brian did it 40 years ago.
We've had some pushback recently. Again, they've had Tranny in the Library, which was transvestites giving stories in libraries to children, except these transvestites, some of them had cutaway trousers so you could see their bollocks and things of this nature. And one with big pendulous breasts running around, you know, not covered. There have been big demonstrations outside these libraries. Now, that wouldn't have happened 2-3 years ago. They were just getting away with it. Now there is pushback upon that. So, yeah, there are various people that are getting fed up with this. They had one in Bristol, didn't they, recently with Kayleen? I forget what her name is. Sort of little blonde Marilyn Monroe, who's getting very vocal about this. She's on the internet. And yeah, people like that are getting a lot more sort of media coverage for their protests.
And of course, Ralph, you align wokeism with Marxism, don't you?
Oh yeah, well they do themselves. You know, they align strongly with Marxism, which is bad because Marxism doesn't work. Marxism is a philosophy for students, you know, because you come through as a student and essentially you're a Marxist because you don't have to earn your wages. So everything is free, as it were, you know, up until you're 18 and you have to start working for yourself. And so Marxism sounds wonderful for a student. And so, of course, they will breed wokeism because that's all they know. And I regard it also as being not just simply Marxism, but the cultural takeover by the unproductive and the uneducated. You know, these people were always thrown to the sidelines of society because they're non-productive. None of these people have a proper job, a proper career, or know anything. But suddenly somebody has given them the levers of power. And so now we have the unproductive with the levers of power trying to run nations like America and Europe and Britain. And of course, they're totally incompetent because they don't know anything. They've never done a proper job. You know, they've been through university and they might work in the education system, or they're unemployed or whatever. These really are the degenerate and the uneducated who know nothing. And they suddenly have been given the levers of power. And this is what they do with it. And the first thing they want to do with it is persecute everybody else because they felt they were sidelined to the borders of society. And now they want their revenge. And this is all about revenge, basically. So, yeah, that is the woke movement in a nutshell. I don't know how you feel about it, Nigel.
Yeah, well, I see wokeism as, you know, the establishment's response to genuine research and finding out truth and focusing on important issues. and that will always happen by a tiny minority, whether that's 1% or 0.1%, I don't know. But it necessarily presents a challenge to the establishment and the rolling agenda towards totalitarianism, global governance, which is the context that we're in. And it's a problem for it. So wokeism is just a faux, let's all look for the truth. Let's all, talk about things that supposedly matter. And it's just clearly nonsense, isn't it? I mean, everybody sees it as nonsense, but
but they're not even searching for the truth. I mean, saying a man is a woman is not the truth.
Of course they're not. Of course so they're not, because they're the establishment. Of course they're not, Ralph, because it's not genuine, is it? So they're not really looking for the truth. If they were, it's not hard to work out that the climate, there's no climate emergency. It's not hard to work out, false flag terrorism. It's not hard to work out that fat doesn't actually make you fat, as simplistically as we were told through the 80s. It's not hard to work out that fluoride in water is not a good idea. You could go on and on and on. There's so many things that simply looking at facts and being evidence-based leads you to the truth, and this whole wokeism is just a false claim to it. So it's never going to fly. It's always going to look hollow.
Brilliant. Okay, well, this leads us on, chaps, to the education system with regards to wokeism. So I think since the advent of the pandemic, I read somewhere in the mainstream media that over 100,000 people are now homeschooling their children. So this is a very, very interesting development in our society. Nigel, I think we've previously discussed on the channel that you have been homeschooling your children. Is that still the case, if you don't mind me asking?
Yes, we still homeschool I have 3 children, 14, 12 and 10, and they've always been homeschooled. They've not been to school at all, or home educated, I prefer to call it. But yes, we very much continue to do that enthusiastically.
What was the incentive? What was the thing that made you make that decision?
It was twofold, really, Paul. Firstly, it was to protect my children from the harm of the educational system. And then it was to try and avail them to perhaps a different way of educating themselves, possibly superior, possibly not, I don't know. But it was partly a rescue from harm, and the other half of it was to try and do something better. Of course, it's very difficult to do something better. When you're isolated, maybe within there is a homeschooling community, of course, and we're part of that. But even within that, it's very challenging to redesign education and make it just the way it needs to be. On the other hand, it's fairly easy to identify the fact that the current educational system is just to be avoided, basically. So that was our motivation.
Brilliant. Ralph, what do you think about the growing number of people that are now homeschooling their children?
I'm not surprised, but I don't like the development, but it's only happening because the education system is so poor, as you were saying, Nigel. You can do a comparison with between us and somewhere like Singapore, and they say on average that British children are 2 years behind a Singaporean because our education is so poor. And this was pre-designed, and I'm going to be controversial here because I don't know about your views on this, but I'll put it out for debate. This started back in the 1980s with the destruction of the grammar school system. The whole point of a nation is to have a scientific and political elite who understand how the world works and can push the nation forward. And initially the Labour Party, and then it was taken up as well by the Conservatives. So this is across the board politically. They had this wonderful new proposal that they would go around the nation looking for all of the best schools in the whole of the land and closing them down. And that's exactly what they did. They destroyed all of the grammar schools. Now, for anyone abroad that doesn't know the grammar school system was wonderful because it took children from any background, the poorest of backgrounds, and it would push them through to Oxford and Cambridge. So it was like getting a private education paid for by the government. It was the elite of the elite schools. And you had to pass a test before you could go there, to make sure it was only the elite students that went in. But you could go from street cleaner as your parents up to Oxford and Cambridge and become a top diplomat or civil servant or whatever in the top of society in one generation. And successive governments have destroyed that system in the name of equality, because they said, oh, it was unfair, it was unequal to students who weren't so bright. Well, that was the whole point of it. That's the whole point of having an elite schooling system. So we end up with an elite who can run the nation, whether it's through the civil service, whether it's science, whether it's doctors, all of the top positions we need. We need elite students. And we destroyed all of those elite students. And I think that was the start of the rot for this society, that we didn't have a grammar school system. So, and that's a controversial position. I don't know how you feel about it, but that's what I think.
Yeah, I would agree that they've been trying to destroy education for some time, and that's definitely a key component of it. It's laughable, the modern education. It really is. I mean, about 15 years ago, my stepson, I was overseeing his education. He went to an ex-grammar school, Richard Hale in Hertford. And I remember talking to his maths teacher and asking what subtopics of maths he was studying, and the answer I got was, well, we're just sort of following the syllabus, and he seemed unable to actually, I was horrified. I mean, that was just one of the indications, but looking at the work that my stepson was doing there, he was more or less encouraged to guess on a lot of homeworks. So I mean, just woefully inadequate. I mean, this was partly fueled my wife and I in our decision to not to participate in the school system. But there's so much wrong with it. But more broadly speaking, the education system as it stands is just training automatons to be fodder for a collectivist state. This is individualism is dead. It's out of fashion. It's discouraged. And it's quite tragic to see what the schools are turning out. I have some young people, within the family, and aunts and uncles and things, and I must admit, I'm alarmed at what you see coming out sort of post university age. It's very troubling for our culture.
Well, this is the trouble. We don't have a broad enough base of people going to the good schools anymore, because they had a report out recently saying there is less social mobility now than in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Well, yes, of course there is, because you destroyed the grammar schools. So, they were the very mechanism by which you could go from the very poorest to the very richest in one generation, going through the Oxbridge schooling. Yeah. That doesn't exist anymore. It just simply doesn't exist. And then they wonder why social mobility is reducing. Well, you caused the problem, dear politician,
I think more deeply though, the problem is that we're churning out functionally illiterate young people. Yes. I mean, there's no way a culture can prosper or even sustain when we're generating functionally illiterate young men and women. And this is why I think homeschooling in this context is an absolute savior. It's the way forward. Rescue the next generation from this disaster.
But it's inefficient. It's very expensive for you in the amount of time you have to put into this yourself, and not everybody can afford that amount of time. That's why we invented schools in the first place, so one person could teach 30 and not just teach 2. So it's an unnecessary burden upon you because the schooling system has failed.
Yes.
It shouldn't be like that.
It shouldn't be like that. But there's no sign of it changing anytime
No.
soon. And
No.
the only solution is to not send your children to that mess.
Yeah.
And the idea of educating children through school is based upon, loosely, it's based upon the idea of having some idea as to what sort of world they're going to be stepping out into. What's it going to be like in 12 years' time when this child finishes its education? I mean, when you look at the uncertainty of the world these days and the political, macro political situation, particularly, what are you getting ready for? What are we getting ready for? I mean, does anybody have any idea? And in that context, the idea of taking a few exams, it's almost there are more important things, dare I say it, very controversially, than just sort of shuffling children through their maths, geography, and chemistry, and having some scientists go off over there. It seems like we need individuals, we need thinkers. We don't need a mass of fodder. So yeah, I mean, I think education is in such a poor state of affairs. The only solution.
Sorry, Nigel. So you think that homeschooling as a temporary measure is a good thing, but what about homeschooling as a permanent thing?
Well, maybe I didn't make myself clear, but I think in this context, home education is the only solution. I'm not suggesting that it is the solution. In a different time and a different context, a political situation, education could be done better. Of course it could. And I'm all for schools and all for institutions of learning. But I think at the moment, the current case is pretty hopeless. And, given the political situation as well, I think that it is the only thing to do, which is obviously why I choose to do it. No surprises there.
Well done, mate. Anyway, well done. I think that's a really, really good thing that you've done there. Let's talk about one more thing today. I'd like to talk about the tax system. Is it fair, or is there a better way? I'm asking this. I know, Nigel, you've talked about this before on your channel, and you've referenced Ayn Rand, someone that's talked about this subject, and I think she was putting forward the idea of philanthropy as a better way, if you like, of running and funding society.
Yeah, well, she had her views suggested that government should stick to the primary three roles of, a military to protect the borders, of course, a court system to protect contracts and rights, and a police force to enforce the laws of the land. So she was very much for keeping government in a small box. And essentially for voluntary payments, no forced, coerced thieving of your money. That was basically her position.
Great. What do you think?
I'm wondering if that could happen in the modern environment. I mean, we did have philanthropy back in the 19th century. You remember the worker villages and towns that were set up by Cadbury and Pears and Bourneville, where successful businessmen, I think a lot of them were Quakers as well, so that maybe helped. They felt it was their duty to respread that wealth that they had gained back into the communities that they ran. And so they made specific worker villages and worker towns, and they were beautiful. For the 19th century, they were well equipped, they were beautiful, they had all the amenities you would never get in a normal sort of rundown town. So they had their libraries, their schools, all of that was built in. And they were built for the workers of those industries. So both people gained. He gained because he got good workers. People would want to actually come and work for this place because they had a good life. And of course, the workers gained because they had the nice life. They had the nice housing and so on, with proper toilets that no one else had at that time, That does seem to be happening in our modern world. I see less and less philanthropists. You get people giving away their money, but like the Soros man that we're not allowed to mention, he seems to be giving it away politically, not for the benefit of people. He's doing it for the benefit of his politics that he thinks is a good idea, and very, very few other people think is a good idea. And if you look at the other philanthropists, you don't really see people, rich people, helping the masses. The only one I could say, and I know you don't like the guy, the only one I would say is halfway there is Elon Musk, because he's not frittering away his money, he's not gambling, he's not running around the world, chasing after women, whatever very rich people do. He is there building businesses. And whether you like his businesses or not, he is making employment, building businesses, building technology for the future, because his future, he wants to go to Mars. And he's made no bones about that. He's looking to the future, which a lot of people don't nowadays. As you were saying there, Nigel, people are looking backwards instead of looking forwards. So I'm not sure if a philanthropist economy would work in the modern era.
Yeah,
too many selfish people.
I wouldn't call it philanthropy, actually. I totally agree with your point. Philanthropy is something that's faded and is of a bygone era at the moment, for a whole host of reasons. But the issue of taxation, we have to think in principles, and you have to go right to the base of it. Do you have the right to keep the product of your own effort? Is it yours or is it not yours? And if someone has, if the institution of government can take it from you forcefully, well, then clearly nothing of yours is yours. So this is where we really need to start. You need to start with a principled approach. Do we want to live in a society where force and coercion are the order of the day? Personally, I don't. So I think there's an awful lot wrong with our culture. And, it's almost difficult, it's impossible to know where to begin to put it all right. But the issue of taxation, I think is theft. I mean, it couldn't be clearer. And unless you're allowed to keep all of the product of your effort, then you're either some kind of indentured servant, or you're in servitude, or you're a slave, but you're clearly not free. And, this is one of the things people need to clock when they evaluate whether or not they live in a free society. Obviously, we do have some freedoms, and that's great. But taxation is hefty evidence that we're not free, and there's considerably more as well.
Yeah, but that taxation has to come from somewhere. You have to pay for the government. I mean, you were mentioning keeping the army and the police force and the judiciary. Yeah. That money has to come from somewhere, so there has to be some taxation. Now,
hang on. Well, let me stop you there. Let me stop you just there, if I may. Sorry, I'm interjecting. But you're saying there has to be money, therefore we need to take it from people. So, but
you have to take it from somewhere.
Well, okay. Let's stop there. Let's pause there. You have to get the money from somewhere. But do we, morally speaking, say it's okay to forcefully remove it from people? Now, that's crossing a huge line. Yes, we have a funding problem. Oh, not really. Well, it is for me. I think that's a very big line.
No, because
somebody comes to steal my money, I think that's a big issue, personally.
Yeah, but if you look at this in the big picture, it doesn't matter whether the money comes from you or whether it comes from another source. It still comes from you. So the alternative to income tax is sales tax or business taxes or some other form of taxes. But if you put on a sales tax, that is your money that is taken from you. If it's put onto businesses, and only businesses pay taxes, well, you pay the increased cost of their goods when you buy their goods. That's your money. So your taxation is being taken from you in exactly the same fashion, but just indirectly. So there always will be taxation. The question is it fair? Is it set at the right rate?
I would disagree with there always has to be money forcefully taken. You see, this is where I was going.
Yeah, but how do you fund your army?
Well, how we fund it is a question that needs to be solved. But first of all, we need to decide, are we going to just simply rob people, or are we going to try and raise money? That's the first moral question.
So how do you raise the money?
And if I may just make one extra point, our culture, our society at the moment is not even ready for any kind of different form of government or revenue raising system. largely because of the reason you cite there, I think, Ralph, because everyone just jumps straight on to taxation. It's impossible to
but
pause.
how will you raise the money?
Yeah, I don't know. But the first question is, are you going to nick it? Are you going to nick it?
It's all
theft. Let me finish this. If you're going to rush, if you're in such a hurry to rush to let's get the money, we need to raise the money, that you're going to rush past the issue of, oh, should we take it from people? Never mind, it's theirs. If you're going to rush past that issue, well, that's the problem. In my view, that is the problem. And we need to stop right there and think, hang on, what are we doing? What are we doing? Do we want a free society where people actually own their own stuff? I mean, I think that's more important than the initial thing of how are we going to raise the money. Oh, quickly, let's fast forward to how we're going to raise money. There are ways of raising money. It's not beyond the wit of man to pay for things. I think it can be solved. But I would always pause on I don't think we should take it by force from anyone. That's just
the problem is if you raise money, you're raising it either directly or indirectly. It doesn't matter how you do it. It's still your money because
people to give it.
You will pay the cost.
Asking people to give it.
You will pay the cost in the increased cost of the goods that you buy. So you're still paying the tax, however it comes. The point with income tax that has to be made is it set at a fair rate? Because the problem is, if you set it at too high a rate and make it too punitive, then people won't bother working. Because as you say, there's no incentive to work if the taxation is too high. And so you can tax companies and you can tax people, but if you stick that tax up, beyond 50% or something, there is absolutely no point people working, and therefore people will stop working, and therefore the economy will stop working. And so whatever taxation you take, it's got to be at a fair rate so that people feel that they've got something left over at the end of the day. Because it's all about incentive. The whole of the economy, all of our civilization, all of our wealth is based on incentivizing people to go out and work. It doesn't matter how you do that. You can do it with bits of money or seashells. I don't care how you do it, but you've got to have an incentive to work. This is why Marxism doesn't work, because there is no incentive to work. I've worked over in Russia. I've worked over in Russia quite a lot, and I've had a lot of people from over there. And you had the situation where, say, commercial pilots were paid the same as a street cleaner. So where is the incentive to go and pass all your exams and all of that difficulty and have all that responsibility if there is no reward for doing so? Well, and that is always the problem.
There isn't any, and the fundamental problem there is government regulation, isn't it, of any kind? I mean, I'm open to the accusation of being called an idealist, or being idealistic, I should say, not a philosophical idealist. But I like freedom. I like the idea of not being coerced, and I imagine a free society. We may be light years away from it at the moment, but that's necessarily the goal I look at and look towards. And it involves not being regulated. You say about incentivizing people. All you've got to do is not regulate them. I mean, have you ever wondered why the corner store is a corner store, but the shop, the house next door to it on the street can't be a shop? Oh no, you're not allowed to do that. You can't turn your house into a shop. I mean, if all regulations stopping people from trading, you can't even run a legal lemonade stand. That's actually technically illegal. The kids can't. They can have fun making lemonade, but at the end of the day, you've got to say, no, kids, that's illegal. You're not allowed to do that. I mean, it's madness. I mean, you just have to take regulations away, and then people can get on and make their own money.
I don't think that always works. I've worked in a lot of countries that have no regulation, and they are a complete mess because there are no rules and guidelines for these people to go on. I mean, you look at places like in India or even America. You go to America, and a lot of their towns and cities are a complete mess because there's very little regulation. So our regulation gives us, I think, a better environment to live in. I mean, you look at the difference between Scandinavia, Norway, and going over to America or something. You will find much cleaner, more organized cities. I suppose Holland is the best example. One of the cleanest, most organized, most productive as societies you can possibly have in the whole world. Now, they are regulated, but they don't need very tough regulation because the people automatically, obey the laws, and so they don't need very tight regulation. But you go to Pakistan, you go to India, you go to Bangladesh, all of these people totally deregulated. You can virtually do what you want, and have a look at the wiring system, across the roads. It's just a complete spaghetti of wires everywhere because there's no regulation. So again, you've got to get this balance right between over-regulation and not enough.
Yeah, there's many factors going on there. We have to be careful not to mix issues up. But again, to speak in principles, and that's the most important thing in my view, to identify the correct principle to follow. And regulation always leads to more regulation, and it ultimately ties people up. And if we're talking about wanting people to work and generate wealth, which I think everyone should be allowed to do, then regulation only gets in the way. So in principle, I am not in favor of regulation. I have a piece of land here. I would love to open a restaurant, bar, venue. I'm not allowed to. Government says no, wrong kind of land. So forget that. If you live in a house, can I use it? Can I use these premises I've got to manufacture and sell something? Oh no, you can't do that. That's domestic. I mean, regulations are yeah, I'm not for them in principle because they simply stop people from doing what they would otherwise best do. And I think just because you can cite some third world country that's where there's chaos and say, look, that's unregulated. That isn't necessarily an accurate way of evaluating whether or not regulations are a good or a bad thing.
Well, I think I'm not a big fan of regulation, so I'm arguing against myself here.
Then but stop it.
The trouble is that a lot of people in this world are very selfish. And if you take the regulations away, they will work in their self-interest and not in the interest of the community. We're coming back to the problem of philanthropists again here, that not enough people are interested in the community. And so we have to have regulation. Have we got too much? Yeah, well, I think we probably have got far too much regulation, but we still need that basis.
I mean, I must say, I don't have a problem with acting in one's own rational self-interest. The idea that selfish is bad is another one of the many myths that we need to extricate from our consciousness. We really do. We've all heard that ever since. To be selfish.
Yeah, but if I come and park on your driveway, you're not going to be happy, are you?
You're not being selfish if you do that. Let me explain, Ralph. You're not acting in your own rational self-interest if you do silly things like that. If you make enemies, if you upset people, is that in your self-interest? I'd say not. So the key word to add in is rational self-interest. Selfish, let's define it. Selfish is to be concerned with one's own interests. Now, breathing and eating, I think, fall right into the category of right up there of most selfish things you can do. So we have to be very careful before we start saying, oh, selfishness is bad. I know we've all been programmed to say that. Everyone has a knee-jerk response. Selfishness is bad. But we thinkers, we 0.1% or 1%, perhaps, I don't know, we need to challenge these things. And if we're rational, then it's not in your self-interest to barge into queues, to nick things, to be an arsehole. It just isn't. It's in your rational self-interest to conduct yourself properly and appropriately. And that is never not a good thing.
But people do it all the time. Queue jumping is notorious. So there's a huge number of people in the population who don't ascribe to that.
No, agreed. But they're not being rationally self-interested. They're just being idiots. So to call them selfish, this is my point, is not accurate because they're not acting in their own self-interest.
Well,
when you barge in a queue, no, they're not. That's short-termism.
Let me finish. They are if they're not punished. So unless all of the other people in the queue turn on them and throw them out, they will continue to do it because it worked for them once, it'll work for them again. So when you say works in your self-interest, you've got to have a mechanism by which people are punished. And I don't necessarily mean the police there, I mean by the rest of people in society.
Yeah,
but the trouble is people in society are so cowed that they can't do anything. You're not allowed to discipline a child nowadays. If you have a child doing something naughty in front of you, you can't discipline that child because that'll be your fault and you'll be sent to prison. So the child grows up knowing that they can do anything they like without discipline and without punishment because the society will not allow adults to intervene.
Do you know what? The thing is that child needs to know that the child doesn't learn that you can grow up and do anything you want, because no successful life is based on anyone going out there and thinking they can act on a whim and do anything they want. That strategy will quickly crash and fail.
But it doesn't for the child. So they can go all the way through to their teenage years and not understand that until maybe they get out into the working world.
Yeah, but basically, rational self-interest is always a winner. And if you're just barging in queues and nicking things, that patently is not in your rational self-interest. And through methods like ostracization, it's not. It's just not.
It is if you get away with it.
Are you going to tolerate somebody barging in front of the queue in front of you in your town or village?
A lot of people do. You look what has happened in California.
That's their fault. The people that will allow other people to behave like assholes and accommodate them, then they are part of the problem.
But you look at what's happened in California. They have made theft up to $900 not an offense. So anyone can steal up to $900 and not be prosecuted whatsoever. So guess what's happening? People are they're going into supermarkets with big black bags. They're filling up and walking out, because it's no longer an offense below $900. And they all know it, and they're getting away with it, and they have mass theft all across California now.
It sounds to me like they've been set up to fail there, I think, really, because But we know, I mean, if that had taken place somewhere else in the world, it may have been more of a successful experiment. But I mean, California, we all know, don't we?
It would never work. We're coming back to Lord of the Flies again. We were talking about this earlier. The wonderful book, I forget when it was written now, this is going back into the 1930s or something, about children left on an island and they have to organize their own society without adult supervision. And of course, it just degenerates into total chaos. That's exactly what you get with some of these communities. If you take away the policing of the society. Not every society is law-abiding. They're just simply not.
Yeah, I mean, it's just unbelievable to hear what nonsense is going on over there. I mean, what a stupid rule. I mean, how can anyone stand up and say that's a good idea? I mean, it's just, if anyone needed any evidence that the world's gone barking mad and it's starting in California, I mean, it's just bloody ridiculous, isn't it? I mean,
but
almost if not worth talking about. It's so insane.
If you live in a fantasy world, then it's logical that that's the way you should go, because that's the way the fantasy goes. Everybody is law-abiding. Everybody is good. Therefore, we don't need to have theft as a crime. Off you go, chaps. We're all going to be nice to each other, aren't we? And of course, they're not. They've got huge, great gangs going around. What do they call it? Do they call it steaming or something? Where a whole group comes into a shop, not just one or two people, and they have a mass theft of 20 or 30 people all at the same time. It's happening all over the place because societies, especially like, as you say, California's society, is just not naturally law-abiding. You might get away with it in Holland. I hate to keep coming back to Holland, but I've never seen such a law-abiding society in my life before. When I lived there for about 6 years. I never saw a policeman. I was wondering if they actually existed, at one point, because they just weren't necessary on a day-to-day basis within society. Because it was very law-abiding, but that's not California. Not the California I know, anyway.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the more a culture, a society degenerates, I should say, so the more you need this law following. You need to force everybody to do the right thing. Ralph, do you think that you can enforce virtue? Is it something that can be enforced?
I think it's much better if it's inbred. And this is the trouble with coming back to our schooling system again that we were talking about earlier. Schools are not imbibing morality into students, and it has to become from a very early age. I'm talking from about 2 or 3 years old. If you do that and it's wrong, it's naughty. I'll smack the back of your hand or whatever. But now, of course, a lot of that discipline that parents had over children does not exist. It's not allowed. It's illegal, a lot of it. And so the children never learn discipline from day one. And then they go to school, of course, and there's no discipline in the schools. And when I went to school, the quality of the education was directly proportional to the teacher in charge. Nothing to do with the students or the curriculum or anything else. It was the effectiveness of that teacher, whether they could keep control in the classroom. If they could not keep control, then the class degenerated and nobody learned anything. And unfortunately, that's the impression I get, that most of schooling today is those sort of teachers who don't want to keep discipline, do not keep discipline, and nobody learns anything. And so you get these students coming out of the other end thinking they can do what on earth they like, because they've been the king of the castle for the last, 10 years, however long you're in school, and never been told that they've done anything wrong in their life. And how do you then start getting virtue out of a student of that nature?
I feel a bit sorry for the teachers, Ralph, because I think their hands are tied, aren't they? Really,
they are.
They've to religiously follow the curriculum. Yep. If they move outside of it in any way at all, their jobs are threatened. So I wouldn't want to be.
And they can't keep discipline because the teacher will be disciplined, not the student. Mm. And so, they're being beaten by their own rod nowadays. It's very difficult. And so we're getting very, very poor students coming out of the other end of the education system. And even the universities are saying this. They're having to give remedial classes to people going into Oxbridge because they don't know the subjects and they can't follow the standard curriculum that they were running, 20 years ago. Yeah. And that's just, it's so patently obvious, the difference between the O-levels. I presume you came up on O-levels. I don't know, Nigel.
Yeah.
The difference between the O-levels and the GCSEs, they were just so much more complex than any of the examinations you take today.
Yeah. But I mean, coming back to enforcing virtue, I don't think it can be done. And I think, and our whole culture is saturated with control. I mean, parents are trying to control their children, and the governments are trying to control people, and there's an ongoing theme of control. Most parenting is a sort of a behaviourist model, but I'm not sure that it can be done. And I think it can be achieved that you arrive at a situation where the rules aren't broken, and everybody sits there in silent terror and doesn't move. I'm not saying it's unachievable to get to order, but I think that there's a big compromise in the individual, because an individual who's self-motivated to do the right thing, that individual is really liberated to be able to achieve a happy life, whereas another child who just meekly does as he's told and is always effectively programmed to accommodate whatever orders and instructions are thrown at him, well, that person's never going to live their own life. So there's a trade-off, and there's a balance, and maybe one day in that happy utopia, people will be more self-motivated to be to do the right thing.
But virtue is not about beating people into submission. That's not what I'm advocating.
I agree.
Virtue is instilling in people, teaching people, and I'm sure it is a learnt response. as many things are a learnt response. You can teach people virtue through their life and the reactions you give to whatever those people are doing. You can teach people the difference between good and bad, because I'm not entirely sure that people are born knowing what is good and what is bad. They learn that through the education system, through their interactions with other people, with other children. I mean, every child from the age of like 4 or 5 knows who the nasty child is, and they keep away from them because they know that child is rather evil. So people understand this from a very early age, and they can differentiate, and hopefully they will learn. And so, yeah, I think virtue is a learnt response, and we could do much better in actually teaching it.
It's interesting because the whole concept of government and regulation rests on the assumption that doing the right thing, virtue, can be regulated and enforced. You can make the rules and everyone does the right thing. Bingo, done. You know, it sounds like a bit of a German model, but
well, we all live in that environment to a degree. You know, when you come up to a red traffic light, you stop. You don't say, "I'm a rebel, I'm going to go through."
Well, that would just be silly, though, wouldn't it? That would be silly.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
let's assume we're all
system.
sensible adults, and virtue, though, has to be something that you choose. It's a choice, isn't it? It's you choose to be a good citizen, to be considerate.
You have a choice when you come to a red traffic light whether you stop or not. Do you normally do it? Yes, of course we do, because that's inculcated within society. But you can also do that with other virtues within society. It's not just, the 1 or 2 things that you can learn. I'm sure it's a learnt response, and we're not doing enough to actually teach people. And I hate to see it. A lot of this is the sort of demise of Christianity within the country. And I'm saying this as a committed atheist, so I'm arguing against myself again. But one of the things they were good at doing is inculcating morality within society, within children. Didn't always work, of course, because they were the biggest hypocrites, going as far as morality was concerned. But there you go. They still taught it to the next generation, and you ended up with a reasonably moral sort of society. That's not happening, and it's not been replaced by anything else. Christian teaching has disappeared, and what's it been replaced by? Not by much. A bit of airy fairy sort of fantasies, that everyone is naturally good, which I don't believe at all. Coming back to Lord of the Flies, they're not naturally good at all. By the way, Lord of the Flies, if you don't know, the reason they chose that name is because Lord of the Flies is Beelzebub, the devil. So within the Old Testament, Beelzebub is the Lord of the Flies, hence the title of the book. So he's calling these children devils because that's what they came, without supervision, without adult control. And essentially, a lot of our education system now is education without adult control, because the adults have no mechanism of controlling the children. And that might work just to finish very briefly, that might work in a top flight private school where the children are sort of naturally, perhaps well behaving, but it's not going to work in a sink estate. It's just simply not going to work.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, Ralph, would you say that you need to be controlled, or would you say, do you know what? I'm a big boy. I can manage my life. I don't actually need any controls. I can manage my life.
Oh, we all need controls, but we need to learn the systems of control within that society, and then we apply them naturally. So we don't need a policeman on each corner. Again, going back to my Holland equivalent, there was no control because people instinctively obeyed the laws. And so you didn't need control. You go to America and there's a policeman on every corner because naturally the people don't obey the law. And you have to have people there to enforce it. And they enforce it very, very harshly as well, because the society is not naturally law-abiding. They've worse than us. They have an education system that's obviously much worse than anything in Europe, and they are not bringing up generations of law-abiding citizens. And then, of course, you get really woke politicians saying, defund the police. If we get rid of the police, because they live in this fantasy world, if we get rid of the police, everything will be great. And of course, then they defunded the police, and now murder rate has doubled in a lot of these Democrat cities, and they have an epidemic of, firearms offenses and so on. They are not naturally law-abiding, and the real problem for America, well, for the Democrats, is the really unlawful sectors in society are the very sectors that they're trying to protect. They're desperately trying to protect the black community from the oppression of the police force. They take the police away, and the whole place dissolves into, gang warfare. And so they've achieved the complete opposite of what they wanted to achieve by getting rid of the police force, because those communities are not naturally law-abiding. And there are many reasons why you might want to say that is. I'm not being racist here. It's just a matter of fact. If you look at the data from America of firearms offenses and homicides, it is overwhelmingly black on black communities with black on black deaths. Absolutely overwhelmingly, like 10 to 1. I mean, it's a huge difference.
That surely is a poverty problem rather than a race issue.
Yeah, it's certainly not a race issue. No, I'm not saying it is a race issue. I'm saying it's a cultural issue. But the cultural issue they will not address in this modern society. And you have people like Don Lemon on CNN, who's, I don't know if you know, he's one of their very outspoken black commentators in America on CNN. And 10 years ago, he came out with his 5 points for addressing the problems in the black community. And they included things like fatherless families, lack of discipline within schools, gang warfare, gang culture within black communities, all of these things that you might say is common sense. He would not be allowed to say that today. In fact, one of the other commentators, young lady, I forget what her name is now, I'll remember her name in a minute. She came out and said the same thing about a year ago, and she was utterly condemned for saying so, when all she was doing was repeating what Don Lemon had said 10 years ago. And basically, it's common sense. If you have fatherless families, you're not going to get the discipline. You're not necessarily going to get the next generation that you want. So yeah, it has nothing to do with race. It's all to do with culture, and the culture that has been almost promoted within some of those communities. So anyway, I don't know what you feel about that, Nigel.
Yeah, well, I think we kicked that off with control. I was curious as to what you thought as well, Paul, about whether or not you need to be controlled. Because I mean, again, I'm thinking in principles here. I'm not trying to come up with a magic solution to fix the world, but I know that when I look inside myself, when I introspect, I know that I don't need to be controlled. I don't want to be controlled. I'm no threat to anyone, apart from I might produce some things and go and sell them and try and get some money, which I'd like to keep, all of it, please. So I know that when I drive at the traffic lights, I'm quite happy to choose to stop at a red. I don't need to be controlled. So my point is, I suppose, that through introspection, I've arrived at the conclusion that it's quite possible for human beings to function quite adequately without being controlled. So yeah, I was just curious what you guys thought about, thinking at a really personal level. Do I need to be controlled? Do I need somebody to tell me to get up in the morning? No.
All I want to do is to sell health products to people, to make them better, to grow my own food, grow my own vegetables and fruit, play my guitar in the evening, talk to Ralph occasionally, and be left alone. That is all I want, And but everyone's different at the end of the day. What I've taken from this conversation today is that I think a better and a fairer world is possible, but it's going to take a bloody long time to get there.
It's a generational thing. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's going to take a long time.
But
Guys,
we will never achieve it though if we're led by fantasists, and this is the whole problem with the woke movement. It's all based on a fantasy, and this goes across not just to culture, it goes across to science. I've been talking a lot about this recently with fantasy science, because a lot of these fantasists now are in sort of governmental positions of deciding where the next science is going to go to, because they have the funding strings, and so they can control this. And they are funding fake science because they are fantasists and they think that all these things will work. And there have been some utter frauds recently where people have made millions, hundreds of millions in some cases, based on fraudulent applications, because the people in government don't understand the difference between fantasy and fact. You had the solar roads scandal, which sounds like, a good idea. We'll have solar roads generating electricity. And they managed to take the government for 30 million euros. This was in France. And of course, a solar road will never work. They just never take the punishment of being out on the road. And they're not even facing into the sun. And at 52 degrees north, you're not going to get anything of it. And once the surface has been scuffed, it's going to generate nothing. But they took 30 million euros for this wonderful idea. And of course, they built a road. It lasted 1 year. And the decrease in generation decreased by 50% per year. And it wasn't generating anything anyway, because it's not facing the sun. And so its cost per watt hour was something like 1 million times more than just having a normal solar array in a field somewhere. And yet they thought this was a good idea because, they had attached the word sustainable to it, and environmentally friendly, that was pushed out there as well. And so they got 30 million euros. And they're doing exactly the same thing in America now. They've got dear old Buttigieg is his name. I forget what his name is. I don't know. The transport minister over in America, Buttigieg, who was only given that permission because he ticked a few boxes. We all know why he got that position. And he's doing exactly the same. Having seen the failure in France, he's now putting money into this in America and saying what a wonderful idea this is. And it's a complete and utter fantasy. So we've got fantasies within our society, but now those fantasies are creeping into technology and science as well. And that's a really slippery slope to go down.
Absolutely agree. Okay, guys, I'm going to have to stop there, unfortunately. This conversation could probably go on for another 8-9 hours. And
I think so.
Very, very entertaining. But I have to jump now, unfortunately. Thank you so much, Nigel, for joining us.
Thank you very much
I've really enjoyed listening to you today. Thank you, Ralph, obviously.
Thanks,
Please
Paul.
like, share, subscribe, viewers, and we'll be back next month with another Shards of Illumination. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.